Stephen Brooks. I'm the Rubber Onion, your host in this podcast about all things animation. This week, I've got a special interview episode to share with you. We talk with internet animation pioneer Adam Phillips. Check it out.
My name's Adam Phillips, and you're listening to the Rubber Onion Animation Podcast. Also, I'm an idiot.
Self-effacing humor is an amazing way to get ahead in the game. I've employed it often myself, but he is no idiot, I say. After working at Disney for about a decade, he helped change the landscape of indie animation into what we see today when he created his Brackenwood series, which he animated in Adobe Flash and uploaded to Newgrounds. He recently took a liking to the Toon Boom products and even wrote a book, the book, on it. It's called Animate 2 Harmony. That's 2-T-O, not 2 as in boys to men. You get the point. You should absolutely check it out, not just because we have the same book publisher. I own it, and it's awesome. It's filled with his personality and humor and way of sharing information, which you'll hear in this episode. Not necessarily related to the previous statement is the fact that if you're a fan of this podcast, you'll know that we let our guests decide whether or not the interview is going to be explicit by waiting until they swear, if ever. Spoiler alert, Adam swears. And we all know that swearing is cool, so by the transitive property, Adam is cool, and I am cool by association. Don't argue with me. That's just math. He currently works for one of my favorite TV shows that's on right now, and that's Bob's Burgers. He runs a successful special effects animation course from his own website, Bitey.com, and has started a Patreon page to produce the next line of Brackenwood shorts. So you should check him out right now. Right now, check him out at patreon.com/Bitey. Before we get into the show, I want to let you know that I am, of course, joined, as always, by my friend, fellow animator, and co-host, Mr. Rob Yulfo. Listen for his funny voice when we get into the show. If you like what you hear and you want more of this type of content and others like tutorials, video blogs, and cartoons, head over to patreon.com/RubberOnion. That's my Patreon. And consider supporting me. And check out the list of perks you get in return. Some cool stuff in there. Finally, I have a book coming out this summer, which I alluded to earlier through the same publisher as Adam's book. My book's called Tradigital Animate CC, 12 Principles of Animation in Adobe Animate. The link is in the podcast post, so consider checking it out for pre-order. That's it. That's your intro, people. If you want to talk about this podcast on social media, the official hashtag is hashtag RubberOnionPodcast, because that just seemed obvious. And I hope to see you there. So with all that out of the way, I want to say welcome to episode 130 of the Rubber Onion Animation Podcast, and this one simply titled The Adam Phillips Interview. Enjoy. Rob, meet Adam.
Oh, hello.
Adam, meet Rob.
Hello. Nice to meet you.
Hello.
This podcast is mostly my attempt to get Rob to meet more people. So
Yes.
really the show's all downhill from here.
right.
It's just... I actually want to start off. You did an animated short called Taken in 2005, and I wanted to know how pissed you were when Liam Neeson's Taken came out in 2008.
Yeah, actually, my people are in touch with Liam Neeson himself. We're supposed to have lunch this afternoon, so I'm hoping we can wrap this up on time. But
There's two types of animators that I found. There's animators that watch animated movies for their inspiration, and then there's animators who basically pull it from any other source but animation, because that's what they do for work.
yeah, well, it's kind of embarrassing for me that people will say, oh, yeah, have you seen this animation or have you seen this short film? And I'm just like, no, I've never heard of it, just because I'm so, stuck in this room and focused on my own stuff that I never get to see what other people are doing. Like now and then, I'll see stuff that goes crazy on Facebook or whatever, and I might see something that, Michel Garnier or Joseph Gilland has done, or some other crazy
Interesting.
animator. Yeah, but I'm kind of like
Sticking with the special effects animator crew.
Well, they're the ones that come to mind, but there are other things that I admire. I don't tend to remember the names of the people who made the shorts that I like, but, if it makes a real impression on me, I'll seek it out and maybe send them an email or something. But yeah, I'm kind of one of those guys who I don't know much about what's going on out there, apart from my own stuff. When it comes to inspiration, I don't really have any influences in the world of animation. Like, I have influences from comic books back when I was in my teens.
Yeah, a lot of animators say that. Comic books is a big influencer on a lot of animators. I have noticed that a lot of animators say the exact same thing that you do, that essentially the deeper that you get into the world of animation, especially indie animators, the less you absorb what other people are producing. Like, sometimes you want to veer off into a different form of media consumption to get whatever inspiration you get out of it.
Yeah, I don't think I intentionally go out looking for inspiration. I get that question a lot, like, what's your influences, what's your inspiration? inspiration. But personally, for me, my stuff just comes from internally. Like, I don't know where it really comes from. Sometimes I'll have a dream or listen to a piece of music or just be walking around and, whether it's walking down the street or walking through some kind of like walking track or something. And if I get inspired by something, it just seems to come from nowhere. I mean, it comes from a whole variety of places. I don't seek out effects artists or indie filmmakers or, games or whatever, even though inspiration can come from those areas, from those spots.
You run in circles and you have like a social network, and whatever pops up on your feed, that's what you see.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I won't go looking for inspiration.
So there's two things that I have to get out of the way up front. There are certain questions that I must ask whenever I have anybody on, and they're different every time, but they're all somewhere around if you have an interesting name and if you had any attachment to Disney, which you happen to have both. I'm not talking about Adam Phillips. I'm talking about your online Twitter handle. Now, I want to tell you how I've been pronouncing that name forever, and I'm sure you've heard it. It's spelled Chluaid, and I have always in my brain thought Chluaid. That's what I have always pronounced it in my brain. How is it actually pronounced?
Clyde.
I
don't really care.
Clyde.
I don't really care how people pronounce it. Like, I've been using that alias since like 1999 when I was gaming online. That was my very first internet alias. So people have been calling it Chul or Clue, or the gaming clan that I was in used to just shorten it to Clue, so they would call me Clue. But
sure,
yeah, Chul, Chluaid, Kool-Aid. There's all sorts of like.
Well, when I heard Clyde, I was just thinking, the orange ghost from Pac-Man. It's Inky, Blinky, Pinky, and Clyde.
Right, yeah, it's pronounced like that, but I don't know the names of the ghosts, Pac-Man.
So why did you choose that name?
I was learning Irish Gaelic at the time, and I bought this book. I wanted to learn Irish Gaelic just because I thought it would be cool, because I love all that whole like foresty, medieval kind of green stuff. So I started to learn Irish Gaelic. There was no internet resources back then, and this was in like 98 or something. And so I just bought a book that said, teach yourself Gaelic. So I started learning this Gaelic, and then I found out that it was Scottish Gaelic, which is like even more obscure than Irish Gaelic. And in the book that was for Gaelic, it had a street sign, and it says Strathclyde, which is a place in Scotland. But in the Gaelic pronunciation that's written underneath, like on all the signs, they have the English kind of pronunciation, then the Gaelic word for it underneath. And it had this cool Chluaid, Strathclyde, at the end. So I just chose that as Clyde. I've got this memory of getting in the car with my dad, and he says, "Let's ride, Clyde." I kind of always liked the word Clyde. So that's what I used it for. It's my first internet name.
You worked at Disney Animation Studio in Australia.
Yep.
You were a special effects animator. The question is, how did that come about? Because I assume you didn't start in that position.
I left school early. I left school after year 10, so I don't have a high school. I don't have a like year 12 or higher school certificate. So I was one of those dropouts. I didn't really have any education to get into the fields I wanted to, which was electronics and even something like sign writing. I wanted to do that, but they required a higher school certificate. My education wasn't that great.
Did you say electronics?
Yeah.
Like what kind of electronics?
Well, I just love putting together little kits and things and soldering, and I wanted to build like robots and things.
Johnny Five.
I don't know what Johnny Five is. Is that
you never saw Short Circuit?
Oh, yeah. Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So
need more input.
Yeah, I wanted to do all that. And I love those kind of like 80s computer movies like Electric Dreams. And
right. War games. Would you like to play a game?
Oh, I never saw that. I probably wasn't allowed to see it. Protected child.
So I'm 0 for 2 on my references. Continuing on.
Yeah, and so I wanted to get into electronics and some other things, but I hated school so much, I thought giving up my dreams of what I wanted to do was well worth it to get out of school, because I just hated school. I hated the people. I hated everything. So I was educated for little more than working on farms and in kitchens and things like that. When I was 20, I was working in a steel factory in Queensland. All this time, I've been drawing. I've been drawing since before I could walk, my mother tells me. I was kind of into comics and into making my own comic. That was one of my big dreams. And I was kind of resigned to just doing T-shirts for local touch football teams. You know, the only way an artist could earn a living is by doing letterheads for local businesses, or, you know, some shitty comic strip once a month in the local newspaper or T-shirts for local sports teams. And so I did a couple of those, and that was kind of what I thought my life was going to be. I was going to be working on a farm, driving tractors and throwing sheep around. On the side, I would be doing T-shirts and stupid shit like that. Then fast forward to like when I was 20, I was working in this steel factory in Queensland. In my spare time, like at night, I was living in this little caravan or trailer on the beach, and it was incredible. It was the best time of my life. But I got my arm caught in a machine in the factory.
Jesus.
And it broke my arm. That was my left arm, thankfully.
You're right-handed, I assume.
Yeah. It pulled my arm into the machine and wrapped it around these steel shafts and kind of snapped it all over the place.
Holy.
So what resulted from that is 6 months of time off, just sitting in my trailer. So I was drawing for 6 months non-stop. It was 3 months to start with. Then I went back to work for 3 months. My arm started to hurt, so they sent me back to hospital to get the plates taken out, because there were plates and screws and everything all on my arm. But for that first 3 months, I was just sleeping all day and drawing all night. And when my eyes got tired, I would go out in the middle of the night and walk up and down the beach. And it was just incredible. It was just like perfect situation, because thanks to that accident, the company was basically paying me to improve my drawing skills, because I was being paid full-time job, really. And I just learned so much from Simon Bisley and Eastman and Laird and just these amazing comic book artists that I wanted to be like.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle reference. Fans of the podcast know I'm a huge Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle fan.
Yeah, well,
whenever anybody drops that.
Some turtle along.
By the way, I have to interject and say that this is very interesting, because there's kind of a parallel to Rob, where we just talked about recently. Rob has recently undergone a surgery to help with his foot, but when we first started the podcast, he was getting surgery for a club foot. He was born with a club foot, so he got surgery to fix that. Now, the parallel is that that's exactly his situation, is that he got time off of work.
Yeah.
It's amazing what you can accomplish in 6 months and just not sleeping and just laying in bed all day. Yeah, you're in so much pain, but you don't care because you're getting to be so creative.
He was never more productive than in that time. We're recording the podcast and he's lying on his bed sideways like George Costanza in that painting from Seinfeld. So it's very interesting the way that works out. You take an opportunity like that and just throw yourself into it. So you came out on the other side of that with, was it a new passion, or was it just a realization that, I could do this?
Because my skill improved so much, I really, in that 6 months, learned everything I know today about anatomy and perspective and black and white inking. I spent probably weeks, if you string it all together, just drawing hands and copying hands from Simon Bisley's Lobo, which
really,
Bisley's Lobo was my major inspiration. It still is. Like, I open that
Lobo, okay.
And his is the best Lobo, easily. But I can open that book and read it like I'm reading it for the first time. It's just, the inks are amazing in that. And so I'd be reading that at night. I'd have my paper and pens out all the time, wherever I was in life. I'd always have the paper and pens out. This was well before digital art anyway. So like nowadays, it's so rare that I get to do some traditional art, which is only something that I've recently got back into, and I'm loving it. But yeah, I'd have these massive sheets of butcher's paper, and I think I got a whole bunch of reject A2 size sheets from a local printer or something back then. I forget exactly where I got them. I would fill those up with just hands, looking through this one series of Simon Bisley comics, and I would just be drawing the hands, because I noticed in the comics themselves, every now and then, The Last Sazanian, did you ever read that one? It's a Lobo comic by Bisley.
No.
I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, C-Z-A-R, Sazanian, but there's a couple of spreads in there of Bisley's doodles, like just quick sketches kind of things. What I loved about that comic is that you'd have the focus of the frame, which might be Lobo in the middle of this fight, and all in the background, dead guys in the corner and stuff that have these beautifully drawn hands and just really simple shapes that just says so much. That was just what I wanted to do.
Because you injured your left hand, whoever was staying at your house, did they open the door and just see a room full of hands and just think you went insane?
Oh, wow. I'd never thought of that.
He's fallen down the well.
Fantastic. This is what I wish my hand looked like.
Have you seen the new Lobo, by the way?
Oh, I've seen a few Lobos. I like the one in the
new hipster Lobo?
No, the hipster. Oh, yeah. I don't know how long ago the thing you're talking about is, but like about a year and a half, 2 years ago, I saw a new kind of young, cool Lobo that they were doing. And I put this thing on Reddit that got like 0 votes. But I drew this thing of Lobo prancing along. And there was like flowers, and the Lobo was written in like sausage balloons kind of things. And it was all pretty and happy. And he's looking all... Yeah, that's what I thought of that design anyway.
It's interesting, we didn't get all the way up to Disney, but I think it's actually more interesting to hear how you got to that initial point, because there's 2 people so far that I've met in the artistic world. There's ones that work at offices and people that work from home, and I'm not just talking about freelancers, but since you've had experience in both, do you feel in one or the other category? Do you feel like you have a benefit, I guess, starting out in the studio world?
I guess I can work in both, but because Disney was the dream job, that was like after the factory thing, and I left that factory and recovered from the broken arm and had all these new knowledge about drawing and stuff. Working professionally as an artist was my new dream. That was the dream job. So when I got the job at Disney, it was kind of like the happy ending. Okay, story's finished. Yeah. Here we go. Like, he lived happily ever after. And then like I was in that dream job, and I still, to this day, I'm so grateful to have been able to work for 11 years for Disney. The friends that I made are still my best friends today, and I've been working from home now longer than I was working for Disney, which is kind of blows me away sometimes. But it's definitely the major kind of point. And now this is the sequel to my life, because we had the happy ending and now this is the sequel. And working from home, like I've always been a little bit of an introvert, but I love the occasional night out. I love seeing friends again. And I'm not a party animal. I'm not one of those guys who wishes he was back in the studio. I think because of that is why I've been able to be successful at working from home, because I know people who have tried working from home, they say you just got to be so disciplined, and I'm not that disciplined, and I miss talking to people over the cubicle wall, or I miss being able hearing people chatting in the hallways and stuff like that. And for me, I've never been like that. I'm happy to work from home. And in fact, I did a little bit of work for EA back in 2010. They flew me over there, and I got to go to Comic-Con and everything, and I worked for 3 weeks in their studio, and it was so hard. I've got a lot of respect for the people, and I was so flattered that a company like EA would want to bring me on board for a project and fly me over there to do some work. And I was just like, hey, I'm just this little Australian guy who don't think my skills, they don't warrant such attention. But I was so flattered and so grateful that they gave me that opportunity. But it was so difficult to actually have to be there at work and stay there till the end of the day.
Yeah.
And then at 5 o'clock, you go home. So for me, that whole structure thing, like, it's like, I don't want to be here for this amount of time and then have to go home and then be back and do it all the next day. And I remember sitting there at the desk, like with my laptop from home, and everyone's just like working away quietly. And the Disney studio that I was used to, everyone's always standing up, throwing things at each other and, playing tricks or just doing stupid shit all day and having a laugh and talking over the wall all day. So working in this programmer's environment was so difficult for me. But so needless to say, I was very glad to get back home, but I made new friends there as well, and I'm still in touch with them. So it's all good experience, but I prefer working from home.
So you don't feel like you have much of a difficulty separating that work-life balance thing at home? A lot of people do, myself included. It's difficult sometimes finding that line. It becomes very, very blurry, especially if you're constantly moving it based on the project.
Yeah, well, I've always said that working from home is living at work. And if you're prepared for your work to be your home, then I don't think there needs to be a line. For me, I'll sit here and do 2 hours of work, get up and go and fly the drone or play with a cat or do something else for an hour or whatever. Then sit down for another half hour, do a bit more work and go, I don't really feel like working. And then you just mess about basically for the whole day. And then in the evening, sit down and you just find yourself focusing at the right time. So it's like the thing that writers always say, your month's work is this big, and the actual time that you spend working is right at the back of the deadline. The whole month you're like farting about, surfing the internet, just wandering around online, and then the night before the deadline is when you get everything done. And so that's kind of worked for me. But I mean, with the work I'm doing on Bob's Burgers at the moment, I do have a more structured thing because it's my full-time job, or one of my full-time jobs. I have to regularly communicate with those people. So a few times a week we have update calls and progress report kind of things. Yeah.
So let's talk about that, because just to break the wall, to tell the listeners, Rob is still in New York. I'm in England. Everybody knows this. And last year, we actually didn't even, I don't think I mentioned this. Maybe once I did. But Adam, you're in Australia.
Yeah.
Which, if anyone hasn't been able to figure out the accent by now, but you got funky time zones down there, 15-minute intervals. But the complication that I have seen being in England since I moved here on a freelance basis is that time difference. And mine's only 5-hour time difference to New York. And then from there, I got an 8-hour time difference to California. I'm pretty sure Bob's Burgers is California, correct?
Yeah.
So for you, what is it like being on another, not just the other side of the world, but also another quadrant, I guess, because you're also Southern Hemisphere as opposed to Northern Hemisphere. I mean, everything changes. The daylight savings. I also have to say, I set up this call thinking the current time difference, and then I didn't take into account the daylight savings was going to happen in between the time that I set up the call to the time that we were on the call. So the time difference changed it 2 hours in different ways.
As luck would have it.
So what's that like? That has to be complicated.
It's not really. I mean, the great thing about working from home is that you can shift your hours along to match, who you're working with, or at least make it easier. If I was working 9 to 5 like everyone else in Australia or down in Sydney, then it would be difficult because we'd only have this small window. If I was in a studio and we had to sync up with the LA studio, it would be difficult. But for me, I can work right through to the early hours of the morning, where the difference really is only 7 hours. I mean, it's so far in front that it's coming back around the other side of the clock. So,
oh, I see. You just shift the date.
Yeah, that's right. Right now it's 10:30 a.m. here in LA. It'll be 3:30 p.m. So they're just like in the afternoon, but on the previous day. Yeah. So it's not really that hard. Right. Yeah.
That's very interesting. So what's it like working on Bob's Burgers? I have to say, from a personal standpoint, it is one of, if not my favorite show on TV. I never miss an episode. You worked at Disney. You said that was a dream job. Bob's Burgers seems kind of dreamlike, especially you work from home.
Yeah, this is another happy ending kind of thing, because I got the job because they were looking for a storyboard artist. Well, the supervising director, him and I are, I guess you could say best friends, or he's my best friend. I don't know.
Bernard
He's more
Derriman?
Popular than me. Yeah.
How do you pronounce? Is it Bernard or is it Bernard? Because I've been saying Bernard forever.
Well, I call him Bernard, but all his American co-workers call him Bernard, so it doesn't matter. He doesn't care about that like I don't care about Clyde Chluaid kind of thing.
So just to update our listeners, he did the Arjun Poopy online series with Arj Barker, but my favorite one was Everyone Else Has Had More Sex Than Me, the music video that he did.
Yep.
And best name for a website ever, Squetch.
Yeah, he was really surprised that he got that, actually.
I love it. And when I found out about it, I was really jealous.
Yeah,
and
then
I hated him just a little bit for that.
He found out a few years after getting it that Pixar had this proprietary software they called Squetch.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, he was expecting that they might approach him for their domain, but I'm not sure that happened.
Hey, a buyout's a buyout from Pixar.
I'd sell it
if it were mine. I'd hand it right over.
Yeah, here you go. I'll just pay off my house. That's
I'd cash that Disney check. Yeah, okay. So he pulled you in as a storyboard artist, but you do some animation on it as well, right?
Well, he pulled me in as an effects artist. He said, "Oh, we need some."
Oh, he did. Okay.
Yeah, we need some effects on this episode. Are you free? And I was just doing like the occasional bit of freelance effects work for them. And my first episode for them was a mechanical shark episode.
Yes.
So he had me animate the mechanical shark. I had a local friend, build the shark in 3D in Maya, and then I opened it up in Maya on my end and animated it, and then they used that over there for their 2D team, got onto that and hand drew it. So I think that was my first job for them. And then I did effects for them, like whenever there was a big fire sequence, or, there was one sequence where a house catches fire from a barbecue, so I just did all the flames up the wall and stuff for that, and they were very happy with it. And we were all working in the same software, which was great, because I was a Harmony animator and a Storyboard Pro user, so that's what they needed. The studio was using Harmony. And then there was the camping episode where they go off on this thing, and there were these river rapids and stuff, and so that was the first major kind of effects job I had for them. But then when they were looking for storyboard artists, Bernard, my name came up in a meeting, and he said, I think Adam would be pretty good at this. So got in touch, and I said, yeah, I'd love to. After a season or so, they got me on to be an assistant director. So I went from effects through storyboarding to being assistant directing. Storyboarding, like thumbnail storyboarding, yeah.
We didn't actually finish the Disney thing, but I assume you went in there either as an in-betweener or as an apprentice, I guess.
Yeah.
They would teach you how to do things, and then you would enter as an in-betweener in-betweener.
Yeah.
I don't know how you got to special effects, but to tie it in with this, it's almost like you continued that progression afterward. You got pulled into Bob's Burgers as a special effects animator. Then you kept working up from there to assistant director.
The Disney thing, I think I was very, very lucky to get to come in the decade that I did, because in the 90s, or maybe it was just the Australian thing, but they weren't looking for people who had the college education. You know, they weren't animation students, or, you know, I was just a kid working on a farm in this outback town, and I love to draw. And so when I saw there was an ad in the paper asking for trainees to work for Disney, and I went, oh yeah, I'll send them my comic book pages. So I did that, and they pretty much called me and said, come in for an interview. We want you to do an in-betweening test. So they were looking for people who could draw, not people who had the education or the degree.
And you had never done in-betweening before? Like, you have never tried flip books or anything like that?
No, I never even considered animation as a career. Disney, Hanna-Barbera, all that was completely off my radar. I only ever considered comic books. And so when this animation opportunity came up, I was like, oh yeah, why did I never think of that before? I mean, I say it was the dream job, but for me, it was only a dream after I had arrived. Because before that, the dream was comics.
I'm not too up on that. What's the Australian animation scene like?
Well, I haven't been.
Well, now I know it's much different with the Lego movie and everything.
Well, a lot of my ex-Disney friends, you know, whenever you see something that was done in Australia, it's at a place like Animal Logic, or there's another studio here, 2D, 3D studio called Flying Bark. A lot of my ex-Disney colleagues still work in the animation industry, are at those companies. But apart from that, like I said before, I don't know what's going on outside this room, let alone what's going on. You know, I know that they're working there, but I don't know what the latest projects are, or what's a good 2D studio, or, you know, if I see an animated ad on television, I'll say, oh, that kind of looks like trainees work, or that looks like nicknames that you've got for people.
I see. Yeah, that's fun. Yeah.
And then you'll find out later, oh yeah, this guy actually did work on that. I'm really limited about what I know about the animation industry. People say, what's the best school I can go to, or what's the best studio I can apply to? And I'm like, dude, I have no idea. I'm sorry.
When you get together with other animators, do you talk animation at all, or is it completely unrelated?
I never hang out with anyone.
That answers my cabin fever question.
No, Bernard came to visit his family. His family lives about 2 hours from here, and he passes through this town when he goes to visit them, when he comes back to Australia. So he dropped in last time, and we sat down at a local cafe, and we both just talked about animation and Bob's Burgers and the people that we know, and that's kind of what we talked about. We don't really talk about what's going on in the animation world. It's just kind of more an insular, what are we doing kind of thing.
What do you do to get outside of that? Because you say that you're living your work at home. Forget exactly how you phrased it, but do you ever need to get outside of that freelance indie thing, or you feel fairly comfortable with your dynamic of being able to shift back and forth? Like you were mentioning going on walks and things like that. I in particular like to go on camping trips and things. You seem like a tinkerer, or at least, well, you said you were flying drones, and I know you built some sort of thing a long time ago, so some sort of weapon of dispute.
Weapon of minor annoyance, yeah.
Do you feel like you have to do like major things to get outside of that freelancing grind every once in a while? Because I go in waves. I have intense freelance focus, and then I need a break.
I never miss a deadline, so I'm very focused on work. And I sometimes overcommit. I'll say yes to a bunch of jobs and then realize that I can't handle it and I'll have to drop one or two or something. But I manage my time really well. And what I was saying about working from home is living at work. Mm-hmm. But for me, it's not like a job. So I don't really have an intense freelance focus. I don't have a strict schedule where I'll stay in the chair until I've finished a job. I don't do that often. I mostly just mess about and come back to work. So I've essentially got 20 hours to do whatever I want.
I see.
Yeah, I mean, if I do 2 hours of work here and then in the evening come back and do another 4 hours, that's almost a day's work, but the whole day has been kind of fun and relaxed.
Do you exercise or?
I've started to have some sciatic problems just recently, so I've...
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's from sitting, because I've been sitting for my entire working life pretty much since I was 20. But I think it might have been just from moving something out in the yard. But I've always been active, and up until a year ago, I was just lots of trail walks, midnight walks. I used to love those. Like, I'd finish up work for the night, and then I'd go out and at like 2 to 3 a.m. be completely dead all through the town and just walking. And up here it gets foggy as well, so it's just beautiful night walks. But the last year or so, I've had these like lower back and sciatic kind of pains, so I feel like a bit of an old man.
I like how you blame that on activity rather than it's not from sitting all the time. It's probably from doing that yard work that I was doing.
I shouldn't do any more of that yard work. I should probably just sit a bit more.
I pointed out that Rob had surgery on his foot.
Yeah, foot, heart.
Foot. Well, you made a post, I remember, on your website.
Yeah.
I remember reading it, and you announced that you were going to get open heart surgery, and you were very open about it, no pun. Did that impact you at all as far as what you decided to focus on, your personal work, what you do as activities? Did that do anything for your day-to-day, or is it simply they made you part cyborg?
Well, I've always had this heart condition where I can exercise and I can push myself hard and I can do endurance stuff and I can do, burst stuff. Like I used to love playing squash. But every time I exercise, there's a point where I know I shouldn't go any further, otherwise I'll pass out. Because basically my heart was inefficient. And it's not an uncommon thing. It's just called a heart murmur. And it's essentially the valve in there that isn't efficient. It doesn't close efficiently. So you've got...
tiny bit of backflow.
Yeah, exactly. So when the blood goes through the heart and it starts flowing backwards, the valve closes so it doesn't go backwards. So that happens with every beat of your heart. And my valve was piss weak. It was like a little bit lame, and then it got lamer and lamer. So when I was about 15, I collapsed on the field at work, at school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's taken off in an ambulance, and they said, we've probably got to send you to Sydney for this little procedure where they crush the valve in your heart. So they really just put a balloon in there and like destroy the valve against the side of the heart kind of thing. So the valve just becomes this...
That sounds horrifying with a very silly sound.
Yeah. Well, I think that, that's my kind of like interpretation of it. I'm sure I'm brutalizing it, but it really just stops impeding the flow. And so that's why when you push yourself hard in exercise, there comes a point where the heart's just not doing its job very well. So, you just get short of breath, and then you start to black out, and then you fall down and vomit, and then you get dragged off by the ankles.
Saturday night.
Exactly. Yeah. And they actually said to me when I was about 8, and I remember the doctor saying, no, you don't have to worry about it now. When you're about 40, you'll probably have to have surgery. And right on my 40th, like I was 39 at the time, and I found that I could not walk from here to the kitchen without being short of breath. I mean, for the 5 years leading up, things had been getting worse. I'd been getting more and more short of breath, and I thought, I'm really unfit. I've got to get out. I wasn't useless and wasn't like spreading around the room or anything. I was getting up and walking everywhere. I always have done that. I've always been really active, but it just got to the point where I couldn't even tie my shoes without being short of breath. And so I went to the doctor, and he went, whoa, you're urgent. We've got to put you in surgery straight away. And that was pretty much when I made the post, because I hardly ever see the doctor. And when I went to see him, it was so advanced that I had just launched the Kickstarter as well, which,
Right. That's right.
And I was like, oh no.
And you were still running the effects course. I forget how long you were into that, but you were doing that also. Those two things were happening in tandem, right? Yeah,
well, actually, the heart surgery was what made me decide. I thought I would be off work for 6-8 weeks, or, I thought I'd be out of action for a long period of time. So I thought, this idea that I've had for an effects course, I've got to get that up and running so I've got some income, because otherwise, I'll lose the house or something. That's why I set up the effects course, is because I was going into surgery.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I see.
So in that time, from the time that I found out that I was going into surgery until the time that I actually went into surgery, I started developing all the effects course content. And so when I woke up, the first thing I did when I came out, where they allow mobile phones in the hospital, I came out to the room and I logged on to see how the effects course was doing. And it also helped that I added 2 months of the effects course as a reward in the Kickstarter. And so that got a lot more backers on the Kickstarter as well. So that worked out really well. I was glad that I kind of had that.
Well, Stephen's looking at bookshelf.
You saw me looking back. I was looking back because mentioned the Kickstarter. Hold on one second. I got...
There's always some connection to that bookshelf within every interview.
I do. I have something on my bookshelf for every interview. Oh, there you go. I got the character sketchbook here from the Kickstarter. Yay!
I heard that's an amazing book, but that's only what I've heard. I don't have it, so...
You did answer my question, by the way, which was, I guess, the effects course. Like, as soon as you got that word, the effects course was the thing you kicked into action.
Yeah.
You need plan for the future type of thing. Well, speaking of ripping your chest open and playing with your heart, let's talk about the Dashkin game.
Speaking of ripping my heart out, yeah.
I figured that was an appropriate transition. I don't want to give the full timeline myself, but suffice to say that you had an idea for a game, you tried to put it through, ran into some roadblocks, and then ultimately had to call it. I remember you saying that you were going to clean up some files and put that online. Has that happened yet, or is that still in the works?
Well, the idea, after I cancelled it, the idea was to release the source files. I mean, I delivered the Kickstarter rewards, or most of them. Some of them couldn't be delivered because of they were part of the game itself.
Right.
The idea was to release all the working files because the game was cancelled.
Yeah.
When I wrote that blog post about Dashkin dies in the end, because I did have some people contact me and say, I'd be happy to help you finish the game, or do you want to finish the game together or whatever. I've been in two minds about that. For one, I've never liked the fact that the game is in Flash. And that's not because I don't use Flash anymore. That's just because the Flash puts severe limitations on what you can do in a game. I know there's limitations in any, whatever engine you use, but there are things from the very beginning that I wanted in the game that couldn't be in it. And so if I was to redo the game with somebody, I think I'd like to rebuild it from scratch in a different engine like Unity or Unreal Engine or whatever else is out there. I even started learning Game Maker Pro myself, but I think I'm resigned to the fact that I'll never be a game developer. But
a coder.
Yeah, I'm going to have to team up with somebody. But so that's one thing, is if I release all the source files, then that pretty much closes the door on building the game like properly from scratch with another team. I wrote at the end of that blog post that while I've kind of made my mind up to release the source files, I am open to working with other people should that opportunity come up. And recently somebody on the Dashkin Facebook page started complaining and saying I was a thief and everything because I hadn't delivered the game, and so I got this easy $27,000 and for me, like, it's been anything but easy, and I've delivered the Kickstarter rewards, or 90% of the Kickstarter rewards.
Yeah, now might be a good time to point out all the fees and everything that come with that. Kickstarter it's no joke. There's a lot of fees that come out of that, and then on top of that, make and deliver all the rewards. So what were you left with?
Well, that's you've covered about 40%, I think, of the costs. Because on top of that, well, for us, there's that initial Kickstarter figure that everybody sees when the project's successful.
Right.
You've got that figure up front, and everybody thinks, "Wow, that was a successful campaign." Then you take in the fees, Amazon 5% and the Kickstarter 5%, and then we split it in half, so we get 50-50. We each pay tax in our own country. At the end of that, splitting it and the fees, I got about $6,500 and Sean got about the same. Like, I don't know if I should say this, but he was doing it tough financially. So I took care of all the freight and everything myself. I didn't hit him up for half of the rewards and shipping and all that. So all the self-publishing of the book, the prints and freight and everything, I just paid for out of my pocket. And I ended up going into a couple of grand into debt just to get those rewards out, because I think the sketchbook by itself was about $3,500 in shipping.
Holy cow.
And that was print on demand. That was the cheap version of self-publishing.
Right.
For someone to suggest that I made an easy 27 grand and I stole it and ran off with the money was just a bit rich. So I had to clarify that on the Dashkin page. But
so what ultimately happened? What was the ultimate roadblock? Was it just everything that you went to was a straw that broke the camel's back type of thing? Or was it you tried to partner up with a game maker at some point?
Yeah.
And then internally they broke up, scattered to the winds. And what ultimately was the thing that just went, we can't continue doing this?
To go back to the start of it, when I was working for EA back in 2010, that 3 weeks that I was talking about before.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
They're the guys that offered to help us make the game. Because at the time they were scouting for 2D properties. They made Fancy Pants Adventures with Brad Bourne.
Okay.
And they put that on consoles, and, that whole thing was a success. Sean and I had already teamed up. I had met him through a Newgrounds project that Tom had synced us up with called The Power of Three. And he was syncing up people in teams of 3, so programmer, artist, and musician. The whole project was called The Power of Three, and Tom said at the time,
oh, that's interesting.
His goal for that was to help people meet each other and form collaborative teams for the future. That was like back in 2009 or something, I guess. And so when I thought I want to make a Brackenwood game, I contacted the guy that Tom had teamed me up with. His name on Newgrounds is Weasel, or Diseased Weasel. Yeah, that was Sean McGee. So I got in touch with him and said, do you want to make a Dashkin game? And he was all keen. And I said, how do you want to split it? And he said, well, I'd normally go 50-50, but how about I'll help you do your game and then you can help me do my game. And I said, okay, yeah, that sounds great. I'll do art for your game and you do programming for mine. So we started on Dashkin. And then that was around the time I went over, like in 2010, I went over to do some work for EA 2D, and they knew I was working on a game with Sean and they were excited for me and stuff, but they didn't really want to commit to anything because I said, oh, well, I know you're looking for 2D properties. How about Dashkin? And they didn't really want to commit. Yeah. And then, so me and Sean decided to do something that we could show them. We put together a kind of like little playable prototype, and that got them excited. And they said, yeah, all right, let's start working towards making it a EA 2D property. So I went, okay, yeah, great. And they wanted to make it a Facebook game, which I kind of was against kind of what I wanted to do with the game. I didn't want it to be a social game.
Was there talk of like a mobile app and type of thing, or was that too early?
Yeah, I think it was a bit too early, but they wanted to make it a Facebook game where you would connect with your friends and try and beat each other's scores. So essentially like a Cannibalt style endless runner. So the very first kind of idea for the game that I had was an endless runner like Cannibalt or Robot Unicorn Attack. But it evolved like after EA said, okay, we're going to go through some internal changes. I think you should take it back. Like, we won't sign the contracts. So I went, oh, okay, fine. So me and Sean went back to the drawing board kind of and decided to, at one point, to rebuild it from scratch because he wasn't happy with the way it was built and stuff. So we started it from scratch and it started to look really, really good. And it wasn't an endless runner anymore. It was more like a speed-based platformer kind of Sonic style thing.
Yeah.
I mean, even now, like half finished, I can open up that game and have a blast playing it, the playable bits. It's a lot of fun and it kind of made real good progress, but all that progress happened in about the period from about 2011 to 2012. Then from 2012 up to 2015, things just weren't moving. They weren't getting faster. We found it really difficult to sync up because he was having trouble financially. He was prioritizing freelance work.
Sure.
Yeah. So, and I was like doing all this alongside my own freelance stuff, and I wasn't doing that well financially either. And then 2013, I was writing the book, my Fogle Press book. Then 2014, I was still writing that book. So 2013, 2014.
Yeah, been there.
Yeah. It's really tough because it pays nothing until, well, you get your advance on royalties, but then, not exactly a living wage.
The book isn't out yet. Mine comes out hopefully this summer. But I mean, the writing process, you have this grand plan of going through the writing process. You're like, okay, I got all figured out. I'll just go through and do this bang, bang, bang. And then you start writing, writing's hard.
Well, for me, I found writing really easy, but the hardest part was developing the files. And I illustrated the whole book as well. So every time I had a title page or, something, just a funny comic strip or something I wanted in there, all those files were the hard slog for me. So for writing, I just had the table of contents and I just went through chapter by chapter and filled out the table of contents, basically. That's how I structure my writing.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Yeah. But
very brainstorm-like. Almost like when you were writing an essay in school. They'd have you do that structured brainstorm where you're writing out the table of contents.
Yeah, like bullet points.
Yeah, exactly.
And fill them out.
And they just fill that in,
Yeah. Are you a touch typist or are you a hunt and peck man?
I have no idea what either of those things are, but they both sound awesome.
Rob?
Yeah.
Rob, maybe you can...
I'm not a typer at all. I'm nowhere near writing a book. Maybe I'll put out a coloring book, perhaps. But.
Oh. Wait, are you saying that can I type with all my fingers in the right keys, or if I do it with a finger? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, like when you're a touch typist.
Totally got it.
When you're a touch typist, you learn to type without looking at the keyboard. You have all your fingers on the home keys, and your fingers know where to go without you looking at it. And
that's me.
That's you?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's me.
Oh, no, yeah. I'm definitely like searching for the buttons.
No, Rob.
Well, the reason I ask
the any key?
Is the writing process is easier when you're a touch typist, because if you're looking at the keyboard thinking, Adam Phillips, there's a double L, there's an IP here.
Right. Typing itself, I have no problem typing.
Right.
And I have no problem, stream of consciousness. I typed with my own voice. The difficulty was I would go back and I would edit and re-edit and re-edit. And I like to funnel things down to the most essentials. And I happen to be very wordy, so I wanted to make it fun to read, but also, so it's maybe a perfectionist part of it. So I could put the words down, but then I was like, there's like 10,000 words in here. I should probably cut it down a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's interesting you brought this up in the middle of talking through the game.
Oh yeah, sorry about that.
No, but I actually do want to talk about that, because there is an interesting, I guess, a shift. I don't know, a permanent shift, but there was an interesting focus that you had the last few years, which is educator, especially with the transition from Flash. Oh, I want one. Sorry, just got a coffee delivery, or tea delivery, whichever one you're drinking, or hot chocolate.
Look.
What does it say?
Ween mug.
Oh, look at that. Oh, there's something that was going to come up.
Yes, that's something that was going to come up.
And then I've got my Ween shirt on, and then I was drinking out of my Ween glass. There's so much Ween here.
Look at that. Speaking of Ween, you did a video where it was a fan-made video, but they actually liked it so much they made it the official video. That's correct?
Yeah.
Did that stuff come with that merchandise? Is that something they sent you?
No, that's because of that whole experience. I became a hardcore Ween fan. So
it was after that.
Yeah, I mean, I liked their album, but you wouldn't have called me a fan, because I just, I didn't have any of their stuff. I just had one album and I really liked it. And then I got onto their forum just because I was interested in what was going on. And the manager had posted that they were looking for ideas for this music video. And I went, I'm going to do something. And I was still working at Disney at the time. I asked, and they said, yeah, go ahead, make something if you want. But the band's just gone on tour, so they're probably going to use footage from the tour for their music video, for this song. And I went, well, I'll make it anyway. So I asked the boss at work, the general manager of the studio, can I take a month off? And he said, no, because we're in crunch time. And I said, well, I'm probably going to have to quit, because I can't not do this. Because it was an opportunity for me to do something independently and break out and do my own kind of thing. And also
Should have threatened to break your arm. I'll break my
jam
arm.
it in a machine.
I'll get 6 months.
Not much machinery at Disney to jam your arm into, though. So maybe a hydraulic light box.
Where's that rotoscope?
After that little pathetic ultimatum, he gave me 2 weeks to do it. So I said, all right. So, and because this was in crunch time, it was unheard of for someone to take 2 weeks off in crunch time. So I am kind of grateful to that general manager of the studio for giving me that time off, because I went away, made the video, I structured it, I worked so hard. And even now, like the people on my forum, which is kind of dead and quiet nowadays, but back then we called it Ween mode. And every time there's a project where someone goes into, insane bubble of work mode, we just call it, call it Ween mode. So I went into Ween mode for 2 weeks and came out the other end with this music video that, looking back now, I wish I had more time, but I'm still pretty happy with it. There's jerky, dodgy animation in it, but it's a great story, which I made up myself. And they loved it so much, as they made it the official video, and they paid me $5,000, which was a huge bonus for me, because that's like, they paid me more for that 2 weeks work than Disney did.
Do you ever look at your work and just go, yeah, that's done? I like that exactly the way it is. I wouldn't change a thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of that, but there's also a lot of the opposite.
Right.
With anything I do, if I have to cut corners, I know that I'm going to regret it later and hope that at the end of the project I'll have a couple of days to go back and make that bit better.
I see.
A few bits in every project where I think I'll come back to this at the end, but for now it's done, but I'm not happy with it. And then there are other scenes where I go, fuck, I'm awesome. That looks so good. I fucking love myself.
Which one was the fuck I'm awesome moment?
The whole chase sequence in the UU is the best work I think I've ever done.
That is my favorite one of the videos. I was going to bring that up, by the way.
And even now, I look at that and I think, how the fuck did I do that?
It's outstanding.
Yeah, I just love... I love watching it. I loved working on it at the time, and I'm so pleased that a lot of people talk about that when they talk about my work. They say, you know, the UU is the kind of achievement, but that chase sequence was like, I know how I did it.
Right.
It's relatively easy for me to do something like that, but it's tedious, and when it comes together and works at the end, like you look at it and you think, yeah, that's exactly what I pictured in my head, and that's what I'm glad it worked out the way I pictured it. Even though today there's better stuff than that online. What did I see the other day? Catfat NG. Do you know that artist? He did the Game Grumps animated thing with Ninetales. Man, that was amazing. It was only like a couple of minutes, but it's that kind of thing that, you know, that's better than the UU. But at the time when I did the UU, that shifting 3D background kind of thing was, I was really, really happy with the way that turned out, because I had the idea in my head and had an idea of how I was going to lay it out and how I was going to storyboard it and stuff, and then just built it up from rough sketches, rough animation, then put in the backgrounds, and then animated the backgrounds on singles, which was really tedious, but and really simple backgrounds. They're not anything special, those backgrounds.
It's very anime flying around type backgrounds where you're hinting at texture with solid, jagged, colored fills.
Yeah.
It works really, really well, but the thing that I'm always impressed by is the sense of layout and space. Like, I know where everything is in the scene, even though he's flying by at superhero speed. I mean, there are some points where I'm not exactly supposed to know where everything is, but I know where he's traveling. But the times when he turns around and does something different, goes back and forth, it's clear. That, to me, is incredibly difficult. I look at that and I go, I would have to spend weeks storyboarding that.
Right. I think just maybe it's from my years of working with Disney and also with being enthusiastic about comics and panel-based storytelling. And I think it's fairly innate after all these years, because when I was at Disney and there were like friends that I had, like Bernard Derryman was such a film student. He loved film and studying cuts and why a director will do something this way and then cut this particular way. And he knew the rules and things not to do. And he would share that with me and I'd learn a lot from him. But I never really was that kind of student. I think I just soaked up stuff. And I make lots of mistakes when I'm making something, but I've learned a lot from working with people who are enthusiasts about this kind of stuff. So for me to lay out that sequence and storyboard that sequence wasn't really difficult. It's just what was in my head. So I wasn't trying to give a sense of space and I wasn't trying to make sure the audience knew where everything is. It was just like how I saw it in my head playing out, which was probably what I would expect to see if I was watching a good director or a good filmmaker make a sequence like that. So it was, I think it's a little bit innate in me, and I would find it difficult to teach that because I don't have a formula.
We have audience questions that are going to come up, so I don't want to tread on those because they kind of get into some things.
Especially the ones who's like, I just have 6 questions.
Being online as an indie animator before YouTube, early days of Newgrounds, how that has shifted. Your Brackenwood series, obviously. I kind of touched on the educator thing. I mean, I got a lot of things that I would like to touch on, but I think that we should get to the big thing that you're pushing now, which is that you have a Patreon. You're coming back to the whole Brackenwood series with a follow-up to Last of the Dashkin, with Last of the Dashkin 2. You just put up that teaser.
Yeah.
Just as a quick rundown, I wrote down the years. I don't know when Old Sage was uploaded. I guess that's not canon, as they say. well, I guess it is canon, but not official Brackenwood series. I don't know. I saw it on Wikipedia. Bottom line, there's Bitey of Brackenwood, 2004. I saw that up on Newgrounds. Prowleys at the River, 2004. Littlefoot, 2005. UU, 2006. Water Lollies, 2007. Last of the Dashkin, 2009.
Yeah.
So with that path, are you coming back at the Last of the Dashkin Part 2 with the same story in mind, or has it kind of shifted? Have you mulled things over in the last few years and been like, you know what, I have a different way that I want to go about it? And how does Patreon fit into that?
Patreon is my attempt to restart Brackenwood from where I left off, because the Kickstarter and the Dashkin game put everything else Brackenwood on hold for 5 years. So the game was supposed to be the next big Brackenwood project. And so because that never happened, it seems like I've been completely doing absolutely nothing with Brackenwood for 5 years. But in reality, I was working on Brackenwood for those 5 years. It just that nobody got to see it because it never got released. So the Patreon is my way of moving on, because the game's been cancelled. It was heartbreaking and everything. But now I want to get back to what I was doing before the game started, and that is making Brackenwood shorts and doing Brackenwood. I had so many dreams for Brackenwood. Like, I had a feature film, I had a graphic novel, I had merchandise, I had squishy vinyl fat sack toys that, you know, I was talking to companies about making these prototypes for these new toys and stuff. The game killed all of that, which is really unfortunate, because the game could have been so awesome, but it stopped everything else. So yeah, that's what the Patreon is to reboot all this. And while I say that I want to work on Brackenwood full-time, I do have a full-time job, but any time since I've been working from home, I've had more than one full-time job. So I expect that while I'm waiting for Brackenwood and the Patreon to support me full-time, if that ever happens, I'll still have my full-time job working on Bob's Burgers or, you know, whatever else I'm working on. That's how I see for the future anyway. But for the teaser, it's not necessarily a chunk of the movie. It's like any other teaser. It's an example of what you can expect from the movie. And there was a few complaints on Newgrounds about, you know, Bitey being this kind of cut-out puppet style, and he looks like he's floating and there's no secondary action. Where's the animation principles kind of thing?
Yeah, I saw that, yeah.
And I don't think I got across too well that was supposed to be slow motion. Like, Bitey is going through.
I got it.
You got it? Oh, that's good. Because
oh yeah, I got it. You know how it is. Look, I love Newgrounds, and they will critique good and bad everything about. We say this a lot on the podcast. Sometimes you get really attacking comments on Newgrounds, but I will say the one thing that comments on Newgrounds have that YouTube never has is I will get paragraphs that describe in detail the level of, like, oh, I liked how you did this little overlapping action here and this little thing, and like, how did you know that? Like, someone pulls out one little reference that I put in, it's like, oh, I heard Swan Lake there. How did you pick that? I just took a sample of that little thing. So I mean, they will go in detail with this stuff, and you know, after that long time, they're picking it apart. They want what they want. They have a lot of expectations in their brain. But I bet once you deliver
the
something.
way the Newgrounds audience differs from YouTube, like what you're saying, the fact that these people on Newgrounds are enthusiasts. They're not just consumers. They're not just like getting shit pumped into their eyes. They're actually enthusiastic about this medium and the skill that it takes and the software that's being used and in what they're watching. So they're interested in the process and giving you valuable feedback. So you get lots of great feedback. It's always like, it's a bit of a joke between artists, I suppose, and that you can get like 3 days of amazing feedback and then one nasty comment, and that's the one you focus on, and that's the one that makes you feel shitty for a week. So it's like,
that's the one you look at and you pine over, like, fight yourself to like not type back at this thing.
Or you do type back and you're full of swearing in all caps, and then you delete it.
Right in this barrage thing, and then you realize it's like, oh, this is a 13-year-old kid. I just spent a couple hours of my life battering this child. Rob, I cut you off like twice. What'd you want to say?
Oh no, I was laughing. I wasn't gonna say anything.
Oh, you were laughing. Oh, that's what it sounds like when you laugh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I got a mixture of laughter.
The thing that I have noticed in Patreon for myself is that the community is very interesting because it's a different subset
Yeah.
that is really into you, so much so that they will put down money to get exclusive content or whatever perks you have. So I find that the community itself is very different, and that's a very motivating thing.
Yeah, well, in this campaign of mine, there's more than a handful of people that have pledged for no reward. They're just supporting me for no promise of poster or a sketch or anything like that. Like,
do you feel bad? Because I have
do.
a couple people like that as well, and I feel bad. I messaged them. I was like, really? You don't really? Because I'm like, just a little something?
Well, I'm incredibly grateful for it, and it takes a bit of a weight off you for delivering awards for those people.
Absolutely.
But yeah, you do feel a bit of like, you sure I could just send you like a poster or, just
like, no, that's going to slow you down. Just work on it. Just work on whatever you have to work on.
That's true. I actually got that exact message. That's exactly what the response was. No, I don't want you to waste time doing something for me. I'm doing this to help you. That was the message that I got. I was like, that's really nice. But yeah, have you found that? Like, you've been on it for a couple weeks now. Have you found
about
the
3
difference
weeks.
in
the thing I love about it's what you were saying. It's a different community to what you would get on Kickstarter, because on Kickstarter, they're pledging for a project that could succeed or fail by the deadline. So if you don't get enough pledges on Kickstarter by the deadline, you don't get anything. And people might not necessarily be fans of your work to support you on Kickstarter. They might just hear about the project and might be think that it looks cool and pledge, a few bucks, because they're not supporting you as a person. They're supporting the project.
Yeah, exactly.
I think with Patreon, they're supporting you as a person. They've seen what you've done. They, I guess largely because there would be people in your Patreon that back you because they like the project, and don't know anything about the person. But for the most part, I think, the people on Patreon are fans of your work who want to see you do more of it. The fact that it can't really fail, it doesn't have a deadline and a cutoff where you could fail. What happens is if you don't produce work, people just will stop pledging. And that's not a failure. That's not a failure of the campaign. That's a decision by the artist to not produce. If I decide, the only way this Patreon would fail is if I decided, I don't think I'm going to do this anymore, and people would just cancel their pledges, and that would be a dick move by any stretch of the imagination. I'm incredibly grateful for the people who have signed up so far, because it just shows me that people still want to see the last of the Dashkin. They want to see how this thing ended, and that's why that's the active project for this. And I say that it's the active project because I expect that once the last of the Dashkin 2 is released, there'll be more projects, and I hope that people will want to see what's coming next. And because there is a whole feature film kind of story that Last of the Dashkin is separate from. So, the Last of the Dashkin 2 will complete the story that started in the first one. But there's a whole feature film script that a friend and I wrote. It's not really a script, it's an outline that we were going to start writing the script. The whole thing's worked out, so there's so much more that can be done after this project.
The world is outstanding. There's something that's very hypnotizing about it for some reason when you watch it. It's kind of, there are some times when you watch something and go, I'm watching someone else's imagination right now. Sometimes it can be trippy to the point where you go, okay, that's a little too much, and I'm thinking, like, you watch Paprika and just go, okay, well, I'm going to have nightmares now. Thank you for that. Barring the Coldplay song, it's dialogue free.
Yeah.
The narration in Last of the Dashkin, barring those two things, your main character, Bitey, he entered a new level of assholishness in Water Lollies, but he's a very charming character. He's this kind of combination of character traits that you get really interested in, and I think that's why he kind of caught on. That's not blowing smoke. That's that's
Thank you very
part
much.
It's a great world.
Thank you. Well, the whole Bitey thing, the way he came about and the way he got popular was a complete surprise to me, because I'm not sure if you knew, but the series, you would know from the Brackenwood sketchbook if you've read it. It's about, it started with Bing Bong, and Bitey was created as a nemesis for Bing Bong, who was supposed to be the main character. So now in the series, after the initial success of Bitey of Brackenwood and the sequel, there was the Proudlies of the River and Littlefoot and all that, Bitey is now the main character, and Bing Bong, I think, is pretty much out of the series. I don't think he has a place in this world that I've built around Bitey now. So Bing Bong is a stupid name anyway, but then again, so is Bitey. But
Bitey's kind of fun. One of my favorite parts in the entire series is when he's just making fun of what's the
big hair, the Morag. Yeah, it's a Bigfoot kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's one of my favorite parts in the entire series.
Yeah.
He's got that charming kind of thing where you go like, oh, you're a dick, but you're kind of funny though. I kind of
yeah. Well, I think that's why he appeals to the Newgrounds crowd. It's he, you know, I put a lot of myself into Bitey. You know,
so you're kind of a dick, but you're lovable. Is that what you're saying?
I have. When you get bullied at school, you have revenge fantasies. So I wasn't badly bullied. I was just a bit of an easy target. So I was a clever kid. I had a brain in my head. You know, I'm going into Donald Trump territory. I've said a lot of things. I have a good brain. But no, I was philosophical, and I was always thinking about life and things. And whenever someone did me wrong, I would try and analyze it and think. I think that's where superheroes came from, don't you think? Superheroes in comic books came from comic book artists having revenge fantasies from being bullied at school. Yeah. It's like they all wear a mask. They all get their revenge against bad guys. So, yeah, I think
I'll show them. I'm going to show up to school with my underwear outside my pants and my blanket stuck to my back.
What is the coolest, most intimidating thing I can think of? Spandex.
Yeah, that ought to stop the wedgies.
Bright neon colors? Yes. Very intimidating.
It'll show up my muscles, all those muscles that I have. You know, Bitey, I think that's why he appeals to people, because it wasn't obvious from the very first Bitey movie, but his resentment of certain creatures and resentment of the world in general is kind of told in The Last of the Dashkin, where he was abandoned. He was this like baby abandoned in the wild, and was adopted by a pair of Morags, and the Morags eventually abandoned him because they had young of their own, and so he was they gave him a good start in life, but he was left alone. He was abandoned again. He had to discover speed on his own, and he had to learn to escape danger, and so he developed this mind of, you know, it's me against everything else. So he thinks the universe revolves around him. He thinks everything's a potential enemy or a potential target. So it's just this fucked up personality that's come out of being abandoned and had to fend for himself.
All right, so are you ready to answer some audience questions? I know we're going a bit long, but I'll try to be quick about them.
No, you're right. Hit me.
All right. Since we talked about Patreon, I'm going to read some of these questions off of Patreon first, since they get first pick. It's part of the thing. Mike, I never know do I pronounce it as one syllable or do I pronounce it as two syllables? I don't know, Mike. Mike Boas.
From Boston?
Mike Boas. He's a boss. What are the pros and cons? That was the most radio DJ thing, like morning. He's the boss. What are the pros and cons of Toon Boom Harmony? Is there anything you can't do with it that you wish you could? I guess that's probably a better question, because I mean, you've answered a lot of these questions. You have tutorials and things, and you have a book. But is there anything that you can't do with it that you wish you could?
That's really good, because I've never been asked that before, and I don't think I have an answer, because everything that I want to do so far, I found I can do. There are things in the program that I wish were a little bit easier and a little bit more beginner friendly. But once I learn to do something in the program that I've found difficult to learn, then I'll just keep doing it, or, you know, maybe I won't use it. Like the new shading nodes, they came out in Harmony 11.1, but it's all the lighting things. I think they could be a bit more user-friendly, a bit easier to use. And there are a few aspects of the program. And indeed, when you talk about that with beginners or people who have tried Harmony, they'll say, I wish it was easier to do such and such, or I wish it was easier to learn, or, you know, they get into the program and they don't know what to do or how to do anything. So there are a few aspects that could be a bit more intuitive or user-friendly. But as far as things that I can't do, yeah, like I say, everything that I want to do in the program, I've been able to do. So I'm sorry, I can't really answer that question. That's really interesting.
Well, I actually asked him in the comments, because he said that he uses After Effects for some things, and I was curious. I was like, you know, because he said he uses it for some camera movements. And I said, why wouldn't you use camera movements straight in Toon Boom?
Yeah.
He finds it difficult to fine tune top view, side view to grab the camera peg, move it around, but there's no way, I think, of nudging the camera with up-down arrow keys or typing XYZ coordinates like in After Effects. But the big thing is, if he's adding texture textures or other raster effects, he wants to do that before the camera move, hence the After Effects. Do you have an answer for that?
Well, he's missed the XYZ coordinates system because you can control that and you can nudge it. You can always zoom in to the top view and side views of the camera and move with fine control. If you attach your camera to a peg, you can move that with some really fine control, and you can always enter the values numerically. So check up on that. So if you right-click on your toolbar at the top, you'll see coordinates, and whatever you've got selected in the timeline or the network view or in the camera view, the coordinates will show in that little thing, and you've got your scale, your translate, and your rotate values there that you can enter numerically.
There you go, Mike. Get on it.
Yeah. So what was the other thing you just? What was the other
thing was that he wants to. It was about adding textures and other raster effects. He wants to do that before the camera move. So he said, hence After Effects.
I don't quite understand the question, but I've always said that.
I don't either.
I've always said that if After Effects had Flash's drawing tools, you'd have a fairly serious competitor to Toon Boom, because Toon Boom has everything that Flash has, plus pretty much everything that an animator would do in After Effects. So any effects plugins, there's a lot of really powerful stuff in After Effects, but in Toon Boom, there's a basic set of plugins that are extremely powerful. But if you want to expand that, you can, because it has new OpenEffects functionality. Like you can access the OpenEffects libraries through there. So
I found this extra question that he had. I found this thing really interesting, and I was wondering if you had a thought on it. He says, "What's the best way to dive into the Bitey verse? Is there a specific order we should watch the cartoons in? Would you recommend chronological, or do you?"
Well, The Last of the Dashkin was meant to be not only a boost, because it had been 2 years since the previous thing when I released The Last of the Dashkin. It was supposed to be kind of like a reminder, hey everyone, this is who Bitey is. But it was also kind of like the entry level kind of introduction to Bitey. Like, who is Bitey? Where did he come from? But it's kind of nice if you watch it in chronological order. You watch the first one, and then you've already got those questions in your head. Who is he? Where's he come from? Why is he a dick? Why is he fighting this like witch kind of thing? Who's the big guy that looks like a big penis? Who's the the little fat farty thing? And then
Donald Trump again.
all those questions I kind of made The Last of the Dashkin to answer those questions. So and that's why I put narration in it, because, and by the way, I don't know if many people know this, but it's not actually narration in The Last of the Dashkin. It's a character talking. So in The Last of the Dashkin 2, that character is who we heard talking. So really she's introducing herself with that narration. She's introduced. She's telling Bitey's story, and she's going to continue.
It's voiceover.
It is voiceover, yeah. It's not narration.
I think I might have even caught on to that when I was listening to it. It just said narration because I know everybody calls it narration.
Yeah, well, at the end of the thing, she goes, "We're about to find out," and you see this robed, hooded person with magic coming off her hands, and you assume that at that point, if not earlier, you would assume that she's the one who's been talking this whole time.
Jesse J. Jones, J. Jonah Jameson. It's a lot of alliteration here. He says, we kind of touched on this, but, maybe you have a different answer. How do you balance your professional work with your independent projects and still make time for actual real life? You basically said that you just kind of do everything at once, which I think speaks to, the fact that a career is your life.
Yeah.
But since you're doing independent stuff and professional stuff, that was one thing that we didn't touch on, was not the separation between animation and your life, but the separation between your paid work and I guess your independent stuff.
Yeah, well, like I said, I have, at any given time, I have 2 or 3 jobs on, and if I choose to take on a full-time job, because recently I've started to just say no to almost every other job because I just want to focus on my full-time stuff with Bob's Burgers and the Patreon campaign and whatever I do with the website, including the FX course. Yeah, to separate those two, I don't really separate them. I just work a bit on one, then I work a bit on the other, and then I go outside and play in the garage and make some evil device, and then I come back inside and do a bit more Bob's Burgers.
So there's no strict timetable or anything like that. You just kind of go like, I want to work on this one now. Or I guess you kind of go flighty until there's a deadline, and then you pick one and go, okay, that one.
I guess it's kind of less these days that I'm a bit flighty until the deadline. It's because I've got this regular full-time gig with Bento Box, Bob's Burgers. My schedule is more structured. But when I was working on things like, an illustration or an album cover or a music video or little bit projects, even with writing, I would be, messing about for a week, and then on one day I would get like a week's work done on one day. Yeah, it's a bit more structured nowadays. So I've got my regular Bob's Burgers kind of schedule thing, and it's between that I work on things like the Patreon and the website and the new animation kind of stuff.
All right.
Yeah.
So now we're on to Facebook. Christopher S. Murphy, who, by the way...
Mr. Nerbs.
Writes down at the bottom, Mr. Nerbs, who's Mr. Nerbs on Brackenwood forum. So he says, regarding Bob's Burgers, I'm curious to know what it's like to work on a network television show from home, with a question mark. Mainly just the tone and feel logistics, like how long do you have to fulfill a scene type of thing. But the more important question, I believe, is the second part, which is when are you going to make another cool pocket assault weapon with rubber bands and household items?
Well, I'll answer that second part of the question first. I have a few cool...
the fun one, yeah.
Yeah. For a long time, I'll come back in time now, give you the whole history of the thing. Okay. For a long time, I was fascinated with making these little silent, powerful... I call them weapons. They're not weapons of mass destruction. They're weapons of minor irritation or minor annoyance. Because I would make them at, in the office at Disney. I was thinking of making a website called Office Artillery, which apparently is a thing now. Yeah, I loved making these little things. But I got to a point like last year where I realized that this thing that I made is the best thing I've ever made, and it's as powerful as I want it to be. It's as silent as I want it to be. It's modular and repairable. It's so good that I haven't actually needed to do it since then. So, I think my weapons of minor annoyance phase, it lasted a good 20, 30 years, but...
it's like getting a high score in a game. You're like, okay, I'm done with that game.
I am done. Yes, I retire undefeated. So for the second part, the first part of that question, regarding logistics of working from Australia with a company in LA online, well, the first thing is we don't really work in scenes like an animator would, because an animator gets a scene from the director or the supervisor. The director talks them through the scene and says, here's how you're going to animate this character acting. But with storyboarding, you're working directly with the script and the director. So the director's got his vision of the script, and I've got the script on one monitor. And this is why it can all be done remotely as well, is that like if I was there in an office, there'd be no real benefit to me working there in an office alongside the director, because
right, I see.
If I was in an office, I would close the door and I would get to work. It's just natural that I'd be able to do that anywhere in the world. So I have the script on one monitor, Storyboard Pro on the main monitor, and I read, the lines of the script. So it'll say, Bob walks into the restaurant, Teddy's eating a burger, and Linda's behind the counter, and Bob says blah, blah, blah. So I'll just think, well, okay, if I want to show that, if I was telling it in a comic book or any other panel-based or scene-based story, what would be the best way to show this? So you would first have your establishing shot with the front of the restaurant, and then you'd have a kind of wide shot when Bob walks in so that you can see Bob walking in, you can see Linda, you can see Teddy, where everybody is, and then once you've established to the audience where everyone is, then you can start cutting in to single shots or two shots or whatever, depending on the dialogue being spoken. So it's really... that's kind of the structure and the logistics of working on, a storyboard for a show like Bob's Burgers.
So it seems like the work that you're doing on it it's a very autonomous workflow. So that's how you're able to split things up. As you said, if you were there, you'd be doing it on your own anyway.
Yeah, and the directors are happy to give you autonomy. Basically, they're saying you have all this experience, that's why we've hired you. So here's the script, here's a couple of things that I would like to see, but otherwise, do you think? So that's kind of what we do, and that's why I guess I'm an assistant director is because, well, the other thing with an assistant director is I storyboard, my storyboards are really rough. It's the thumbnail stage of the storyboards. So after I'm done, then it goes to the storyboard artists themselves who, clean it up and make it look like a nice storyboard. So for me, it's just my part of the job is figuring out the best shot for the scene.
Logistical layout and type of thing.
Exactly. And the most efficient way to where to place the characters to get the most efficient, camera work, so that we're not confusing the audience by cutting around with these odd angles. And, like if you have Gene and Tina, their lines of dialogue are fairly close together, then ideally you would want them to be sitting near each other so that when we cut to Gene's line, Tina can follow up with her line and we don't have to move the camera. We can stay in that shot. So we just work out the best, layout for the characters, the angles of the camera and things like that. Yeah. And the camera movements. I
like the snap zooms. You get a lot of these snap zooms, especially when people are like reacting.
Yeah, they call that the sting.
The sting. Yeah. We got a question from Joe Wayne, Joe Whimsy McFarlane. If that's your full name, I love you already. He says he has a 3-part question, which I'm going to boil down to one, but I'll read the whole thing. He says, for your personal projects, how many seconds of animation can you accomplish per day? What steps do you do to ensure you maintain that? And then what kind of animation warm-ups or exercise you do? I think the animation warm-ups or exercises is interesting because that doesn't actually get talked about very often. If you do anything to warm up, or if you're just at the point where you sit down and go, I know what I want to do. I know how to do it. I'm just going to do it.
Yeah. Well, I start off with 100 star jumps, then 100 sit-ups, and 100 push-ups, and then run to... Have you seen One Punch Man?
No. Oh, my God. You are... just this week alone. What is it about this week in One Punch Man? Is there like some new news out there? You are the 4th person in 1 week to ask me that question. Okay, I guess that's it. Now I have to watch it.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to watch it. That's the... Get cracking on that because it's fantastic.
I'm sorry. Can I say that you have missed 2 of my references and I've missed it? We're just missing references back and forth. We just keep like I make a pop culture reference. You're like, which one's that? Yeah. Oh, that's right.
Yes, I forget what we're talking about now.
I'm a great interviewer. I just derail you on the question.
My warm-ups. Okay.
Warm-up exercises.
Yeah. As far as warming up for animation, I find that if it's not working, then I'll go away. And then I'll come back like later, and if it's working, it's working. And I don't actually have to sit there and practice drawing or sit there and, limber up my wrists or anything. There's nothing like that involved. It's just, if it happens, it happens. And if it doesn't, then I leave.
And going with that, I assume that you don't stick to a certain amount of seconds that you do a day. It's kind of...
Yeah. Well, the thing is, if I don't feel like the animation's working, or I'm not getting into, or I can't draw and characters for some reason, I'll just work on a background. So I don't have a number of seconds that I have to do every day. If I was working in a studio and I had to maintain a quota in order to keep my job, then there might be a bit more structure to that, because that's it's like at Disney. If you don't do a certain number of drawings a day, then you fall behind. And if you haven't got your 10 feet at the end of the week, then you're out the door, or you're on a performance management program. Go away to some fucking awful, retreat to learn how to do your fucking job. Yeah.
Alex Dudley, who also has a Patreon, so I assume this is why he's asking this, is what's the key to getting a lot of supporters on Patreon? What perks do you offer? And do you just need to have the right audience? That came up on a Creator Spotlight. He was just on a Creator Spotlight. We literally just had him on the podcast.
Oh, he asked me a question? I just listened to his podcast the other day.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so this is his question. Oh, that's great. Can you repeat the question? Because the whole time you're asking the question, I was trying to remember, where have I heard that name? Oh, it's just the guy I was listening to in the podcast the other day.
What's the key to getting a lot of supporters on Patreon?
Yes. For me, I feel kind of lucky. I hate to use this response because people say, how'd you get the job at Disney? How you get this? And I'm always, my response is, I think I was a bit lucky. And for me, I think it was because I have a Newgrounds audience, and that came because, some guy out of the blue in 2000 said you should submit your stuff to Newgrounds, and I didn't even know what Newgrounds was in 2000. That's where my audience came from, and they've been the most loyal, amazing fans that one could hope for. The fact that I can, 5 years later after silence on Brackenwood, can release something on Newgrounds, and it gets front paged and it gets lots of enthusiastic comments. And the fact that if I plug a Patreon campaign or a Patreon link in that video, people will sign up and people will, be excited for the project. And I just feel, I guess if there was a secret or a a reason this has all happened. It's because I put my stuff online and I created a lot of personal work. That personal work got noticed, and because of that, I've never had to go looking for work. Work always comes to me, which is something, again, I feel incredibly lucky for. But the fact that I regularly, or not regularly, could not say regularly, but I was fairly prolific in the early days. I released a lot of animation, put so much of my heart and soul into that animation, and I think because of that, I think it's paid off. The fact that I can now start a Patreon campaign and I get people signing up immediately. And incidentally, the very first person to sign up for my Patreon when I announced it was Tom Fulp. And that guy is just,
wow,
he's just
really
always the most supportive, almost the most, I kind of wish I lived in the area because he's a great guy. I know we could be best friends if only we lived near each other. No, I won't be stalking Tom Fulp. I just think he's a fantastic supporter of independent animators and independent animation. He's a godsend for guys like us.
So you say with Patreon is if you build it, they will come. Now, I just wanted to say a movie reference that we will all know.
Wait, what's that from? I'm sorry, I have no idea what you're talking about.
I think it was Jumanji.
Yeah.
I've never seen that.
Well, Ronald Chaparro, Rontron, he asks, what was your inspiration for the character? I believe he's referring to Bitey, but since you already kind of mentioned that, I was wondering if you would pick another character in Brackenwood and say what was your inspiration for that character. Maybe Fat Sack.
Well, Fat Sack actually is really interesting because he never really was supposed to be a character. And I don't think he still is. He's just an incidental creature that makes a recurring appearance. But in Australia, we don't have peeps, Easter peeps. They're marshmallow things that you guys have. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. And so when I released the Fat Sack, when I released Bitey of Brackenwood and Fat Sack made an appearance, people were asking about the peep thing. And I was going, what's a peep? And so that's where I found out that they were these marshmallow treats that you get at Easter. But actually, I modeled it. I think I didn't model it off, but I think it was inspired by. I have only seen the movie once. I mean, I haven't seen it in a long time. But The Fifth Element, Gary Oldman has this weird creature under his desk. You think, oh, Jesus, what's he put this poor creature through?
Oh, my God. Now I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, it looks like this little Hanson puppet thing, but it's this like bag of skin with a trunk and terrified looking eyes, and I think that's where Fat Sack came from. Yeah, so
really, now you have given me a reason to go back and watch that amazing movie.
I haven't seen it since then, and I only saw it once. So I think that kind of got stuck in my brain, and when I was trying to come up with this terrified looking creature who was also useless, and I just thought of that. I think. I didn't consciously think of that, but I think that's where it must have come from, is that useless creature, this bag of juice that just is terrified and useless.
Timothy Bergeron. Get a Bergeron, Plan Bergeron. We have names for all of our listeners. He has so many questions. Tim, we love you, but I have to keep this thing going. But basically, he's kind of asking about what advice can you give about distribution of original animated content? How has the distribution of animated content changed since you first started animating? And I guess this is kind of my way to get to that topic that I was remiss that I didn't cover, which is we've been talking a lot about YouTube and Newgrounds this year, mainly because last year, a lot of YouTube changes. This year seems to be a big story, asking everybody about their questions to YouTube. You started before YouTube, uploading to Newgrounds. So I wondered if you want to kind of expand on that, how you got into the game pre-YouTube and your experiences with Newgrounds and YouTube.
I guess the first thing is that I've never been a big presence on YouTube. Like I don't quite have 30,000 subscribers. My views in total of all my videos on YouTube have about as many views as a popular YouTuber will have on a single video. So, right. I've got 5 million views or something. That's in total on my channel. Because I got angry pretty much at the beginning of YouTube, just the fact that I never saw a cent. I never even made a single cent by monetizing my videos. So at one point I just went, this is an insult to the audience. I respect my audience. I'm not going to throw ads at them. And so I deleted all the monetization. I think I've deleted on most of my videos. And because I've always been working freelance work alongside my personal work, I've never found it necessary to monetize my stuff on YouTube. And I mean, I never relied on YouTube like other animators do as part of my income. So whenever I need to make money, I'll do something on my website or I'll take on more freelance work or something like that. So for me, Newgrounds and YouTube are ways of getting my work in front of an audience. But like we're talking about, Newgrounds is the audience that matters more to me because they're more like someone who can offer me valuable feedback. Whereas YouTube's just like, I love cartoons. And then that's pretty much, there was one YouTube comment like early on who's like, I released a tutorial on YouTube and some kid comments, this is boring as hell. I want cartoons. And my reply was, fuck off to Nickelodeon then. Because, you want cartoons, kid? Go and watch cartoons on television because my channel's not for you. I don't know what's going on. Like, I know there's a lot of pissed off animators because they relied on YouTube for their income and now they can't. But I don't know how that feels. I pretty much I think my income, because it comes from elsewhere, I don't really give a shit about YouTube much.
So has your distribution changed? Do you have a vastly different way that you upload your content now as to before? Or is it just like it's Newgrounds? That's where you put it?
Well, if there's a freelance job that I'm particularly proud of, I'll put it on my website.
Sure.
I'll put it on YouTube, but I'll also embed it into my website, and that will be kind of like the only reason I put it on YouTube is so I don't have to host a 12 meg, 80 meg video on my website. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now with Newgrounds going to video, like whenever I release anything for which my Newgrounds audience follows me, like Brackenwood, then I will release it on Newgrounds first and then later embed it on my website. So if you go back to my animation page on my website, all my Brackenwood stuff is now embedded Newgrounds things instead of the original Flash shorts, which, Flash.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it used to be Flash. But,
yeah, how does that feel now, by the way? Getting away from the, drawing an image and then highlighting it and optimizing to a certain percentage and then, trying to limit as many vector points as possible to keep the file size down. Like now you have video and just go, fuck it.
Yeah.
Just draw and export.
Well, I don't miss the SWF format one little bit. But the other thing is the exporting to video is because the main problem with Flash, or one of the biggest problems I've always thought with Flash, even from Flash 5, the very first time I used it, was that to export your work for broadcast was an absolute nightmare. So to get a video, because back in the day, if I made a thing in Flash, and in order to have it ready for broadcast, you'd have to have it transferred digitally to, whatever, and then onto Betamax tape or something that a television station could run. And that was an absolute nightmare. And even today, getting something out, I don't know, with CC, I don't really care enough to open it up and try it out. But with exporting video, I think that's always been a major problem. I'm sure everyone agrees, even the most frothy Flash evangelist will agree that video from Flash has always been a big problem. And to get that from the SWF or the vector format into a broadcastable format has always been a nightmare for animators. So that's the end of that train of thought. Where was I going with that?
I was just curious what you thought about that, because Harry Partridge just brought up something on Twitter the other day. He said he's thinking about having an animation challenge competition where instead of having a limit of the amount of time, like, we have a limit on our RubberOnion battles of 15 seconds because of Instagram.
Yep.
He was talking about having it be a limit of a file size, like the old days. Got weirdly nostalgic for that Swift file format for a second, and I went, oh, no, I wouldn't, no.
Yeah, well, a big reason I don't miss the SWF format is converting to video.
I see.
That's the format that matters most, because, and we got onto this because I was talking about removing all the... Yeah, fuck, there goes my mic.
Ruined the microphone.
Jesus. Oh, I'm going to have to hold the mic now. I don't know how... my mic thing just broke.
That's what I do. That's how
right.
That's how I roll.
Oh, yeah. Now I feel like a freestyler.
Adam Phillips just did a fucking mic drop on me.
Well,
we got talking about this because I'm done.
Yeah. Interview finished.
Did a Minions mic drop on me. That Google April Fool's Day thing that totally failed.
All right. So sorry about that. No, I was talking about the SWF format on my site. Like, I removed the Swift files because what I miss about them is the fact that the users can't zoom in on my movies now. And you used to be able to zoom in on the movies and find the secrets, and I would deliberately put secrets into all the backgrounds, and they're all gone now. So that's something that we'll never see again, is the secrets in my movies, unless I put in animated secrets like I did on Littlefoot. I've got lots of animated secrets in that. But yeah, interactive secrets as well. Like in the Flash files I had, if you mouse over a certain rock in the stream, a little hole opens up in the rock and there's a little message in there. So and that was found. Like, people would find those things in my movies. So it's that kind of thing that I think I will miss a little bit about the Swift format, and but the fact that it's less and less supported now, it's just makes more sense to embed video. Yeah.
That's really interesting. So only a couple more questions. Lamont Wayne, he just simply asked, how successful has your effects animation course been?
Yeah, it's been very successful. I'm a little bit behind on content, so people have started to catch up to me, but most people kind of end their subscription before they get to that point anyway, because there's over a year of content that if you sign up, you'll have a year's worth of content, or 56 weeks. It goes up to week 56. People who get to that point and then they say, the article stopped coming, and I'll say, well, you probably should pause your subscription now, or you can wait for me to develop the new content. We're at that stage now where the people who have been there the longest can cancel their subscription, and they'll keep access to what they paid for, but cancel their subscription and wait for me to develop new stuff. But the course itself was a huge help in those years after the heart surgery. The fact that it was my income, it pretty much paid the mortgage for all those years, so which was really good. There's more coming, and I'd like to finish developing the second year of content, but that's where it is at the moment.
Nice. Nathan Viney, who's the Daily Crumb. I see you guys go back and forth a lot.
Yep.
Nathan Viney. That's what we call him on the podcast, because his name, we just thought that it sounded like a jingle for like some local supermarket. Come get your stuff. Nathan Viney. Anyway, he says, has he kept any of the old Bing Bong comics from his younger days? The violent ones, I think, that could be scanned and gifted to us.
Bing Bong comics? I don't know what he's talking about.
So he says.
Yeah, I don't know if I have any Bing Bong comics. I mean, I know Nathan from way back. He was one of the first members on my forum back in 2004, and we've kept in touch, like he was like 13 years old or something back then, and he's always been a super fan.
Yeah, he was in London here when I moved to Manchester. He was the first one who came up, and I met him, yeah, and he came up and he, quote, showed me around. I mean, he had never been up to Manchester before, right. And I was asking him all these things about, like, so what's it like here? And he goes, I don't know. I was like, so what do you do like here? He goes, I don't know. He's like, you are the worst English person. He's like, well, I'm kind of, I was like, I'm kind of Australian. I'm kind of English. Yeah. I'm basically neither. I'm a terrible Aussie. I'm a terrible Englishman.
Oh, Nathan, he's lovely.
Yeah, he's great.
No, I have no idea what he's talking about, but it probably comes from like maybe way back in the day. I might have drawn him some Bing Bong panels or something. I don't know. I know I did when he was a kid. I sent him a hand drawn Bitey, and he was so overjoyed about that. It might have been something I sent, but Bing Bong comics. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, Nathan. Hit me up on Facebook.
Swing and a miss, Nate. The last question we have is from Kaishu Mannella. He asks, what are some of your favorite movies or short films? I think it's interesting. It's almost like bookending, kind of the first thing we talked about.
Right. So favorite movies. I've always loved The Host. It's a Korean movie.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's the less you know about it when you start watching it, the better it is. So I'm not going to say anything else.
That's true.
There's a movie called The Host, and it's a Korean movie. So don't get, like, if it's American or if it's a series or anything, it's not what I'm talking about. It's a Korean film, South Korean, called The Host. And
I think it's on Netflix in the United States, actually.
Oh,
so
yeah, I think I did see it on Netflix.
I think you can watch it.
Yeah. So that's
it's good. Yeah,
that's
really
one of my
good.
favorite kind of like obscure movies. Animation-wise, I haven't seen it for many years, but one of the ones that I really remember really liking on the first viewing and how much I loved it was Tekken Kin Creek.
Oh, sure.
And of course the Studio Ghibli or Ghibli, whatever you guys pronounce it, but it's like Giblet and Giblet, isn't it? Who knows what's the right one?
Yeah, I say Jiggly.
Jiggly.
Studio Jiggly.
Jiggly Studio. Yeah, all that stuff, of course, is, you can't not love that stuff if you're an animator or if you're into animation. One of my favorite movies of all time, I think, is The Incredibles, because it's a perfect movie. The Iron Giant is a perfect movie, in my opinion. A perfect story, as well as, the animation's great, but as far as a story, that if that was a live action story, if it was a 3D, if it was a stop motion, it would have worked because the story is just perfect. It's perfect storytelling, and I guess you could say formula, but it's something that works so beautifully from start to finish, and the characters are all great. So I think they're my favorite movies. I mean, I say favorite, they're my favorites, but they're not really. They're just the great ones that come to mind.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you're put on the spot, it's really hard to choose those. I mean, I'm sure like afterwards you think of like a billion other ones.
Yeah.
I was actually wondering when you were answering, like, as far as animation goes, like, do you force yourself to answer that because it's an animation podcast, or like if someone just came up to you and asked you what's your favorite movie, would you say something in animation, or would you say something like The Host, or like for me, Jaws, The Thing?
Yeah, right. I mean, I've got to see, like you say, when you put on the spot, you can't even think. So there's movies that I've said when I've watched it, that's the best movie I've seen ever. And then like then you log on and join an animation podcast and says, what's your favorite movie? And you don't know. So that's, I mean, if I was to keep going, I would think of more and more films that I loved. But yeah, just can't.
Well, I really like to put people on the spot. It makes me feel good to watch people squirm. But be thankful, though. You are the first one to get off scot-free. I did not ask you to introduce yourself, which I have done for every single guest that has been on this podcast. I have asked to introduce themselves, and I did not ask you to do that.
Hi, my name's Adam Phillips. I am a small Australian man. And that's all
I'm definitely going back in time and I'm editing that in.
Maybe I should add some things to it. I mean, I know I've done other stuff. I just can't think of it right now. I like knives. I've seen UFOs.
This is getting weird.
It's true. It's all true.
First thing you say when people ask you, "What's your name?" "I'm Adam. I like knives."
It's like that. I like turtles, kid.
Well, that does it for the questions. It does it for my questions too. This was a lot of fun, and man, you are a trooper. You stuck around for the whole thing and more. And this is your morning. This is your morning.
It's lunchtime now. We went from morning till lunchtime.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
And for me, it's 3:30 in the morning for me.
Congratulations for staying with us. True professional.
I am semi-lucid.
Yeah, I can tell Steven's starting to get that 3 a.m.
sleepy drunk thing.
Silly laughy.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I gotta get off to him and be like, man, I just gotta tell you, I love you, man. I just
You're my best friend, god damn it. And don't you ever question my loyalty, you son of a bitch.
You'll get the phone call tomorrow, like, guess where I am? Take the airplane. Knock, knock, knock.
This was a ton of fun. Thanks for doing it.
Yeah, thank you.
What do I say at the end of this? Adam Phillips, ladies and gentlemen.
Plugs for him to.
Yeah, plugs. Yeah, tell the people. Thank you, Rob. See, that's why you're here. He says like two things on the entire show, but you know what? When you really need him,
I don't talk much, but when I do, I try to make them gems.
Bitey.com, Bitey. That's my personal website, and that's where I've been doing stuff from day 1 or 2 or 3. I'm on Facebook, brackenwood.ent, as in entertainment, brackenwood.ent. Twitter is Chluaid, CHLUAID, and patreon.com/Bitey. Yeah, that's where you'll find me. That's all the stuff that I'm doing, and that's where I update regularly.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Well, thank you. And that'll do it for this episode of the RubberOnion Animation Podcast. Wait. Don't go. Not before. I thank you so much for listening. Old and new fans alike. Hi, new fans. A big thank you also to my patrons for helping me make cool stuff. You can too by going to patreon.com/RubberOnion. I want to thank my co-host Rob Yulfo for being my podcast wingman, and you can follow him on Twitter and Instagram at Rob Yulfo, and his website, MrRobYulfo.com. That's Mr. with an M-R. Thanks so much to Adam Phillips for taking the time to talk with us. You should follow him at all the places he mentioned, but I would really suggest you check him out on Patreon at Bitey and his own website, Bitey.com. From there, you can see all his awesome work and help him too. All of his links will be in the description for this podcast, so just go clickety-clack on one of those links and don't look back. No, actually, please look back because that's me. Look at me! Batman reference or Joker reference. I'm Stephen Brooks. I'm the Rubber Onion, and you can follow me at Rubber Onion everywhere, like Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Tumblr, Google+, Newgrounds, SoundCloud, and Instagram, where we have our Rubber Onion animation battles. Those are a lot of fun. Just check hashtag Rubber Onion Battle for pretty much all that information. You'll get what you need. If you want to participate, just make any animated thing under 15 seconds by the end of the month and tag it with that hashtag I just mentioned, Rubber Onion Battle, on Instagram. Oh, and we have a podcast app for you Android users. It's on the Google Play Store right now. Just search Rubber Onion, that's one word, and download that bad boy for free. If you want to support Rubber Onion, check me out on Patreon. If you want to support Rubber Onion without giving me money, please rate and review us on iTunes. It really helps a lot. Remember, that's Rubber Onion, one word. But the main place to go for all things Rubber Onion is RubberOnion.com, where you find things like this podcast and my blog and a bunch of other stuff. Thanks again to Adam Phillips for being on the show. Thank you again for listening to another episode. If you like it, subscribe, tell your friends about it, and don't forget to say hi. Bye.